Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program, you might know already, where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and find out what they're writing about the Bronx and especially what's behind what they're writing about the borough of the Bronx. We're going to do that in just a moment. And in our second segment, we're going to do a little bit of Bronx history. And we will get into one of the Bronx neighborhoods that's been selected for Sixth to Celebrate by the Historic Districts Council. But right now, let's get started. Let's do the journalist thing and say good evening to Holly Pretsky, who's the deputy managing editor of City and State New York. Holly, nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
Uh, People probably know because some of your colleagues have been here. I am incredibly fond of City and State New York. I read it religiously, like so many of us who are interested in the political scene. I saw this cover page. I pulled it out of my mailbox, this headline, and I was like, wait a minute, it looks like the Inquirer. My job was to try and kill him. And this is the headline story, the front page story that Holly did for City and State New York. This is about, and I really had never heard it characterized this way, but apparently it's a whole industry, so to speak, of Oppo research, which is opposition research. Before we get into some of the specifics, what is opposition research and why did you think correctly this was a good story to do?
Yeah, well, first of all, credit to Stu Lozer for that amazing quote. My job was to try and kill him.
All right.
Bold, and as soon as he said it, I kind of exclaimed. I kind of was like, ah, I can't believe you just said that. But opposition research, when a person runs for a political office, they often, if they have the budget for it, will hire a professional researcher to first look into their background and determine what their vulnerabilities are, whether they still owe taxes or they have an open speeding ticket or there's residency issues or they're being
Some other infidelity in their background.
yes, things like that. So they're trying to do defense and figure out what their vulnerabilities are, but the researcher is also hired to dig up dirt on the opponent as well and figure out, what the opponent's vulnerabilities are and how to highlight those for voters.
So even though in many of the political debates that I have done, and I've done more than 90 here in the borough of the Bronx, um, almost all the candidates will say we want to campaign positively. This is all about the people of the Bronx, et cetera, et cetera. But those candidates may have hired somebody to like keep it away from me, but dig up something about the opponent, put it out there, and of course, then it helps me because the opponent now looks smeared in some form.
Absolutely. Hiring a
I'm
researcher.
just telling it like it is, I guess. Go ahead.
Yes, hiring a researcher who gives the campaign negative information about their opponent. It gives the campaign the ability to pitch negative stories about the opponent to journalists, often on the condition of no fingerprints, meaning the journalist, if they accept the information, if they accept the tip or the research book, they have to agree that they are not going to say this
Not going
sounds.
to say where it came from.
Yes.
What really raised? Go ahead, finish what you was going to say.
It's I don't know that any journalist enjoys that decision, but a lot of times the
Wait, the
information,
decision to not tell their source?
yeah,
Well,
or to
nobody tells their
not
source.
reveal
Yeah,
where the
where it came
information
from.
came from, but this is common. You protect your sources, and a lot of times you do receive information on the condition that you don't expose where the information came from. And a lot of times opposition research does expose important information that voters should know.
There's no question about it. What really interested me is that it's not just a couple of candidates. There's a whole industry in this. This is done all the time, and you which certainly raised my interest. You mentioned a couple of Bronx elected officials. One of them was Elliot Engel, who was at his Maryland home during the lockdown, claiming that, like everybody else, he was, suffering the lockdown in New York. And then somebody took a picture of him on his porch. And the next thing you know, Jamal Bowman has been the congressman in that district. It just absolutely fascinating to me. Now, you mentioned Stu Loser, who also apparently was uh, chased after our friend Freddie Ferrer a little bit. And I don't really remember this. Of course, I was working on the air during the time that this happened. But let's see, the Mark Green campaign okayed flyers with racist anti-Ferrer cartoons that were sent to voters in Italian and Jewish areas of Brooklyn. But then Green himself denounced the flyers. It's just fascinating stuff. I mean, it's really double dealing in some ways, I guess.
Yes, I wasn't sure whether to include that. It felt like important context for the campaign, for what's happening with that campaign, but those flyers weren't themselves really opposition research because they were just political flyers that were sent to voters, and they were reprinting a political cartoon that depicted the Reverend Al Sharpton and then borough
I,
president.
I, I remember those actually.
Yeah,
Um,
and
the, well, then the one was Freddie Ferrer was called Fibbing Fernando. He said he
yes,
was educated in public schools and he actually went to Catholic schools. I mean, frankly, from those of
yeah.
us who know him well in the Bronx, know that that's actually the case. Um, it goes out there, and you've already addressed this, and I was going to ask you about it, is the whole notion of a journalist to then take that information. Is that the information people should be getting? You're a journalist. How hard do you negotiate with yourself over whether or not you should use it, or it's out there? We know it came from an Oppo researcher, but really, if it's reality, maybe the people should have the right to know it.
Yes, this is kind of the core question of the article. Does office
Yes.
research make our politics more toxic, or does it make our politics better because it's a way of vetting candidates? A lot of researchers noted that journalism is not exactly in its strongest in the strongest phase of its history. A lot of newspapers are shrinking or shuttering, reporters are being laid off, or they're working with fewer resources. So, from the researchers' point of view, they're saying, well, we're actually stepping in to fill an investigative void, and we're stepping in to vet these candidates as they should be vetted as part of a democracy. And so, we're actually doing a service to voters. There's some truth to that, I think. I think that's a valid perspective, but I think it's fair to be concerned about a political environment where we are only learning about these episodes from people's pasts or these questionable tweets that they deleted 10 years ago or whatever it may be. If there's a very clear motive, if the only reason we're learning about that is because someone else is trying to destroy them, and the word destroy comes up all the time when you talk about Oppo
Wow.
research.
That's
You know,
amazing.
yeah, is that
It's a
really?
nasty business.
Yes, it could kind of turn politics really ugly and maybe create a political environment where we're not focused so much on someone's ability to lead or govern and their real skills that apply.
Well, that is among the questions, is how relevant is
Right,
it that Freddie Ferrer tried to,
right.
position himself going to public schools when he didn't? I mean, to me, I mean, it's not that big a deal. And did that mean he was not qualified to be mayor? I mean, my goodness, how many things did any candidate actually say that weren't totally true? What you brought up, though, was fascinating to me because you talked about the climate for journalists, that they're being laid off. There's a lot of pressure to come up with stuff. If you want to be the one, you've got to have something nobody else has, and that helps you keep your job. So then maybe you may be more likely to run a story that you're saying, well, it's no big deal, but I can get a headline in the Daily News or in the New York Post out of it. Maybe it helps me keep my job. I mean, it's out there. I know probably both of us would always, favor lean in the side of journalists, but that could be reality as well.
I think that journalists, there's also the question, if someone comes to you and they bring you a negative story about a candidate and you decide not to run it, you're still making a choice. So in that case, you're then kind of protecting that
That's
candidate,
right. That's
like,
right. Right.
so
So then, yeah,
watch
who are
the
you to?
story, watching
Yeah,
count.
that's right. What
So
one of the other before we run out of time, I just want to bring this up. One of the other things that you brought up for failed opposition
mhm,
research was George Santos. That they said that he attended Baruch College, which of course they found later was false. The Oppo research on him didn't go far enough because it wasn't revealed till he was elected and later that he actually was, frankly, a total fraud.
yes, so that's a classic example, and that's what a lot of people will bring up for why they think Oppo is so important, because it failed so clearly in the George Santos case.
Mhm.
Um, the DN or the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is the national campaign apparatus for House Democrats, did put out Oppo research on George Santos, but I don't think they took him very seriously. I mean, he did not seem like a very formidable candidate.
A
So a lot of
formidable
the
opponent.
Oppo,
Yeah.
they didn't really dig super deep into his background. They flagged a few things for sure, and so did the Zimmerman campaign.
Right.
They've said many times that they were flagging, like, this guy's a fraud. But I think, there was a lack of awareness about the
Clearly
real.
a lack of follow through.
Yeah.
Before we run out of time, I just want to ask you: is there a solution to this? Is this just the way it is? Is there an answer to this, or did you simply expose something so when we see negative stuff reported about a candidate, we have a better idea of where it comes from? Or is there, I don't know what you could do to rope it in. People can hire whoever they want, and now the information is out there. You find
I think
anything you want.
that you can't get rid of Oppo research. I think it serves sometimes an important role in our politics and in our democracy. I think the more people that understand how it works, the better, so that people can have that awareness. If they see a negative story pop up about something from deep in someone's past, they can have that awareness that maybe this came from someone with a motive. And then if we as journalists can figure out a way to be more transparent ourselves, sometimes we're not able to do so because of the conditions that are set by the tipster. And that's very common
Yeah,
in many
of
different
course. Don't
stories,
you,
but
you didn't hear this from me. I've heard that a few times. I'm sure. Anyway, Holly, we do got to go. Holly Pretsky, Deputy Managing Editor of City and State New York. As I said, I thought it was an eye opener. It was an education, and I'll be doing debates for the primary coming up in June, and I will have all of this in the back of my mind probably from now till forever. Thank you so much for the great work.
thank you so much for reading it so closely. I really
Of
enjoyed
course, I
talking
go
to you.
cover to cover every week. And best regards to Ralph and all my buddies over there. Okay, thanks so
Very well.
much, folks. We will take a short break. When we come back, as I said, we're going to do the history of one of the most important neighborhoods in the Bronx. They're all important, but this will be Bronx Park East. So don't go away. We'll be right back.